How's it going? Cody with Mayfly Guide Service, another fly tying video today. Today we're going to be tying a Mayhem. You can fish this as a dry. That's what it's originally meant for. I also like to fish this as a nymph as well. Works pretty dang good. Today we'll use a size 18 dry fly hook. I also like to tie these in a size 16, 20s, and even down to a 22, all on a dry fly hook. Some of the materials that we're going to need today, again, we're going to need some fettuccine foam. Use that in a tan. This gray ostrich herl. Trigger point fibers. I like to use the kind of tan natural color. Some ultra wire. I'll use this in silver in extra small. And some black thread. I'm going to use this in an 6/0 today. So we'll start by covering our hook. Going to snip off the extra. Right till about before the bend of the hook there. Now I'm going to grab my trigger point. And I want to grab about 5 or 6 fibers of this. You don't want too many in there. You don't want it to be too clumpy. Something that looks like about that. So I know that these are all going to be even. I like to get them a little wet first. I'm going to cut that. So now I know they're all kind of in line. I'm going to lay that piece on top of my hook here. This is going to be the tail of the fly. I'm just going to wrap that in. And if I want to get rid of these extra little fibers hanging off here, you can kind of just do a few wraps on it and then just give it a few pulls, just nice and steady. I don't want to yank on it. That'll make those lay flat for when I cover that back up. I can leave that extra hanging off for now. I'm going to grab my wire. Grab a piece of this. I'm going to use my wire cutting scissors just so I don't dull out my nicer pair. Going to tie that wire in right at the end here. I want to try and do as few wraps as possible. I don't want this to get bulky on me. So now again, I'm just going to look for a nice tapered body. There's a little bit of bulk there at the end. Also, I'm leaving some extra here. I'm going to be attaching a little bit of foam there. This one's pretty similar to the foam back fly. Just tapering. I want to make sure that it's as fat as it can be towards the head and down by the end of it. By the tail, I want it not as fat. Here the taper doesn't have to be very precise, just a little bit, just as long as you have a nice body to it. I'll also tie this fly in brown thread, green thread, in an olive, and also in yellow as well. This one can represent a midge, any kind of mayfly. Now I'm just going to create a ribbing with this wire, leaving even gaps in between each wrap, working my way back up. Once I get back to here, I'm just going to tie that in. A couple of wraps will do it. Snip that. Now I'm going to grab my fettuccine foam. And again, I'm actually I want to make this even skinnier than it already comes. And a block of foam is just fine too, but I'm going to cut this again lengthwise, because I don't want that head to be super bulky. I just want a nice little piece of this foam. It's probably good. So now I have a tiny piece of foam. I'm going to tie just the tip of that in. Everything's kind of pointing back down towards the point of the hook. Make sure it's centered on top of my fly. Now again, I want to wrap this farther back than I think, because I'm going to pull it forwards and it's going to actually show up a little bit more sparse than as far back as you think you just wrapped. Then from there, I'm going to grab one strand of my ostrich herl, and I'm going to tie it in, not from the tip, but on the butt section there that connects to the main vein. Just going to tie just the tip of that in. I'm going to try and make sure that I cover up all the work that I've done underneath with the black thread. Now I'm going to spin this away from me. And all I really need is like 3 or 4 wraps. Tie that in. Notice that I'm not crowding towards the eye of the hook. I'm leaving plenty of space. All that needs is a couple. Now when I snip this, I can actually cut off some of those top fibers. It's okay right there to get rid of some of those if you want to fish this as a dry fly only. And so it'll float a lot better if you use some hackle right here instead of the ostrich herl. The ostrich herl doesn't float very well. It's going to get wet. It's going to sink. I usually fish this as a nymph, but it does work very well as a dry. So I'm just going to try and cover up some of that foam, any of those hairs that are poking through, creating a nice little head. Now I'm going to get my fingers a little wet, split those hairs so everything's pointing down. Grab my foam, pull it back towards the eye, put a little bit of tension on there. Not too much. Again, this foam will break if I pull on it too hard. Just a couple of wraps. Make sure that's centered. Fold my foam back, wrap a couple of times underneath that foam by the eye of the hook. Grab my whip finisher. Now I'm going to finish below that foam again. Give it a few of those. Snip off my extra. Now I'm going to trim my tail. You know, I probably only want maybe about half a body length on there. That's all it really takes. As a dry, that will also help this thing float very well. If you're using normal hackle on here, between the hackle, the trigger point, and the foam, this thing's going to float very well. So here, I'm going to snip my extra off, but I always want to leave that little bit of a head. I usually probably leave about as much as far as the eye of the hook. That's where I kind of line up my scissors, and that's where I make my snip. And that right there is the Mayhem. Again, you can fish this as a dry, you can fish it as a nymph. You can tie it in different colors. Sometimes I'll use brown thread, olive thread, or yellow thread. Happy tying.